She was the wealthiest widow in the city. She owned everything, except family. Every night, she ate alone. Until one quiet evening, a small chair scraped the floor, and a child sat beside her, changing her life forever. If you love powerful human stories, subscribe to USA Drama 2.0 now. Margaret Whitmore's dining room was large enough to host grand celebrations, yet every evening it held only one voice, hers. The long polished table reflected warm chandelier light, but the chairs remained empty, night after night. Servants prepared meals with precision, placing silverware just so, yet everyone knew the rule. Once dinner was served, Margaret preferred silence. At 72, Margaret was known across the city as a woman of success, discipline, and quiet authority. She had inherited a modest business from her late husband and transformed it into an empire. Newspapers praised her intelligence, charities respected her donations, but behind the tall iron gates of her estate lived a woman who returned each night to an echo. She had no children, no siblings, no laughter at the table, and that emptiness had become her routine. Every evening at exactly 7, Margaret took her seat at the head of the table. Soup first, then the main course, dessert untouched more often than not. The staff knew better than to speak unless spoken to. Dinner, for Margaret, was not a social moment. It was simply another task to complete. That was how life had been, until Elena arrived. Elena was hired as a live-in caretaker, meant to assist with daily routines and help around the house. She was kind, efficient, and quiet, everything Margaret preferred. During the interview, Elena had hesitated before mentioning she had a son. "His name is Daniel," Elena said softly. "He's 6, very well behaved." Margaret paused. Children were unfamiliar territory. "As long as he doesn't disturb my routine," Margaret replied. And so, Elena and her son moved into the staff wing of the estate. For weeks, nothing changed. Margaret ate alone, Daniel stayed in his room. Life remained neatly separated, but children noticed things adults learned to ignore. Daniel noticed how the plates across from Margaret stayed empty. He noticed how the chairs were never moved. He noticed how the large room felt lonely, even when it was full of light. One evening, Elena was delayed finishing her duties. Daniel sat quietly near the kitchen, coloring. When the dinner bell rang, he looked up. "Is she eating alone again?" he asked. Elena nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, remember, we don't interrupt." Daniel thought for a moment. Then, without asking, he stood up. Before Elena could stop him, Daniel walked into the dining room. Margaret was lifting her spoon when she heard it. The sound of a chair being called back. She froze. No one had ever joined her at that table. Slowly, she looked up. A small boy stood beside one of the empty chairs, holding it with both hands. His eyes were wide, curious but not afraid. "I'm sorry," Daniel said politely. "May I sit here? I don't like eating alone." The room went silent. Servants stopped breathing. Elena rushed forward. Margaret stared. For a moment, everyone expected the order, "Remove him." But it never came. Instead, Margaret looked at the empty chair, then at Daniel, then at herself. "Sit," she said quietly. Daniel smiled and climbed onto the chair. That single moment changed everything. Daniel didn't speak much that night. He simply ate, slowly, carefully, occasionally glancing up at Margaret as if making sure she was still there. Margaret found herself doing something she hadn't done in decades. She watched someone else eat, not out of judgment, but curiosity. When Daniel finished, he folded his napkin the way his mother taught him. "Thank you for letting me join you," he said. Margaret nodded. After he left, she realized something startling. Her dessert plate was empty. The next evening, Daniel came again. This time, Margaret didn't wait for the chair to scrape. "Sit," she said as soon as she saw him. Daniel talked more that night. About school, about his drawings, about how big the house felt. "You know," he said, "big rooms are nicer when people are in them." Margaret said nothing, but something loosened in her chest. Days turned into weeks. Daniel became part of the dinner ritual. Then came the questions. Why don't you have pictures on your walls? Did you ever have a family? Were you lonely when you were little? No one had asked Margaret those questions before, and to her own surprise, she answered. She told Daniel about her childhood, about her husband, about the quiet after he passed, about how success filled rooms, but not hearts. Daniel listened, really listened. One evening, Daniel didn't show up. Margaret waited. 7 o'clock passed, 7:15. She looked toward the door. "Where is the boy?" she asked. Elena entered, nervous. "He's not feeling well tonight." I told him he should rest. Margaret stood. I will take my dinner in the kitchen, she said. The staff stared. Margaret had never eaten anywhere else. She carried her plate to the kitchen and sat across from Daniel, who looked surprised. You shouldn't eat alone, she said. That night, something shifted permanently. Margaret began adjusting her schedule around dinner conversations. She asked Daniel about his dreams. He asked her about hers. You don't need to be rich to be important, Daniel once said. You're important because you're nice to me. Margaret excused herself after that, so no one would see the tears. Months passed. Margaret arranged for Daniel's education, not his charity, but his belief. She attended his school events, sat in the audience, clapped the loudest. People noticed. Is that your grandson? Someone asked once. Margaret smiled. Something like that. Then one winter evening, Daniel placed a folded piece of paper beside her plate. What's this? She asked. A drawing, he said, of our family. Margaret unfolded it. There she was. There was Daniel. There was Elena, all at the same table. Margaret pressed the paper to her chest. That night, she updated her will. Not because of money, but because of love. Years later, people would say the wealthy widow finally found happiness. But those who truly knew the story understood something deeper. She didn't find happiness in wealth. She found it in a small chair, a simple question, and a child who refused to let her eat alone. Some hearts don't need grand gestures, just a seat at the table. If this story touched you, subscribe to USA Drama 2.0 for more powerful emotional stories.